It's time for 41 is the Mic, a weekly Chiefs podcast with Nick Jacobs of KSHB 41 and Matt Derrick of Chiefs Digest. 41 is the Mic starts now.
Yes, everyone, you are with 41 is the Mic. Week 4 edition, the Chiefs over the Chargers 17-10, and here to break it all down is myself, Matt Derrick from Chiefs Digest, alongside Nick Jacobs, multiple take enthusiast, Nick Jacobs from KSHB 41.
Hey, I'm just along for the ride, Matt. Okay, I'm just along for the ride. I try to say words, form sentences, and hope for the best.
At least one of us can, and that is indeed you. So we've got that going for us. Hey, you know what? Maybe
that, Matt?
I think maybe the Chiefs could have used multiple takes on Sunday, because start of this game, Nick, was not what the Chiefs wanted.
Yeah, I mean, but like I say, Matt, we all have our struggles in life. This one was a bigger struggle for them against an AFC West opponent, and first time they were getting experience Harbaugh up close and personal. So I don't think they knew what to expect. I think they had some ideas, but I think there was some stuff Harbaugh put their way that took some time for them to adjust to and get used to, and they were able to showcase and flex there towards the end why they have had the success that they have and were able to weather yet another storm.
And weather the storm they did. I mean, this was Chiefs started out and where I guess you could say they had the Chargers exactly where they wanted them, Nick, because the Chiefs were down 10-0. That seems to be when Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs just do seem to wake up. But this was an abysmal start. I mean, and we'll get into a couple of the big storylines coming out of this game. Obviously, looking forward to it, the situation with the Rashee Rice injury and where the Chiefs may go from here, and with the Saints coming up next week. We'll be talking a little bit later about Kareem Hunt and the performance that he had today. But a big part of the storyline of this game, Nick, is, a couple of narratives, one continuing narrative, one destroyed narrative. Patrick Mahomes still struggling, still not playing his best football, but Travis Kelce is back in the record books in a couple of different ways. Good day for him, big day for the Chiefs tight ends. But let's start with Mahomes, because this is becoming a growing story to the point that, I mean, and Patrick Mahomes is once again addressing the questions and talking about it and admitting himself he's not playing well right now. This is 4 games that he is playing certainly below his own standards.
Yeah, and part of that is, I mean, Patrick took the world by storm, and he came in and he had some incredible years, and he had some growing pains further down the road than what most quarterbacks do. And it seems like part of last year and part of this year are part of the growing pains that he's going through with the way defenses have been able to adjust to his game and also to the Chiefs offense. And there are times where I feel like the Chiefs offense potentially gets a little stale at times. And I think there's certain circumstances right now that Patrick's gotten used to, and when those don't always go according to plan, then I think it makes him a little uneasy at times. I think it makes him a little rattled at times. And the bigger question I have for the Chiefs is, what do you do to get him back to zero? Each quarterback has something that they need to get back to zero. So for the Chiefs, what is it that they think they need to do to get him back to zero whenever things get a little out of whack, or do they know yet?
It's interesting you bring that up, because, it was something that even Mahomes mentioned, and it wasn't entirely connected to the Rice injury, but it was just Mahomes feeling like himself and the entire team came out and needed to get settled down after the way that they started. It was a gruesome first quarter for the Chiefs. It was brutal. Mahomes, 3 of 5, 40 yards. That's okay, but also a very bad interception. The offense as a whole in the first quarter was completely off kilter. And when you think about the fact that that's the scripted portion of the game plan, Nick, that's when the Chiefs normally have in the recent past have had their best football is coming up on that script. And then in the past, it's been after that, the struggles come in. This was right off the bat. And the part where they're supposed to have down pat, it was a mess.
Yeah, the question I'm starting to wonder deep down, but we probably won't get an answer to, is on those first 15 and what they're going through and what they're scouting. Are those the looks defenses are actually giving them in practice? Are those the looks that they're expecting? Are those, or is that where they thought this defender was going to be, where that defender was going to be, what this rush was going to do, what this blitz was going to do? In that first 15, are the looks they're scouting, or what are actually happening there? Because that could make a team uneasy. If there's something you've been working on all week, and you're like, hey, we're gonna, for example, I'm just gonna go back to my high school days, because that's what I have to harken on myself. Throughout the week, our line coach, who's the head coach at Oak Park, Ken Clemens, he kept telling us that Mike's going to run for 300, and he told us that going into the week that our star running back was going to run for 300 yards in this game because of the way Blue Springs defense during that time, the way they were stacking the box, the way their scheme was going about, where they were putting 8 men in the box, and the way that they were overwhelming high school offenses with how they pressured. And it was a great scheme, smart scheme. They had a lot of athletes that went on to go play D1 college ball, and some played D2 college ball. And if I remember correctly, in that game, when I counted up, there was somewhere between 14 to 18 guys that played in that game that played college football. That's really, really good for high school in the Missouri, Kansas City area to have that many guys that went on to go play college ball. And one of them was Jerron Baston, who went on to go play at Mizzou, and then he ended up with the Denver Broncos. And then Darius Hill, a really talented wide receiver that went on to go be a tight end and play for the Bengals. Really good guy. Still get to kind of chat with him sometimes through Twitter and everything. And so there was a couple guys that ended up making it to the NFL from that game, and that's awesome in itself. But the point I'm getting at here is throughout that week, we were mentally prepped on what the scheme's purpose was, what they were trying to do, what they were trying to attack, and how we were going to answer to that, and how we had spent, honestly, part of the entire season prepping for that moment. And when that moment arrives for the offensive line, whether it was us being on, people like me being on scout team in practice, or, our offensive line, they had great blocking angles, and Keenan went for over 340 yards in that game on, 40-some carries. And, they couldn't stop it. And so I'm saying what I'm getting at here in a long-winded way is that part of me kind of wonders during the week in the meeting rooms and in some of the scouting, is everything going the way, and are they getting prepped in the way that really puts them in positions to succeed and have confidence? Or is that where some of it's not, where some of the scouting perspective, advanced scouting and everything, are they getting different looks than what they've seen from opponents through some of that, because the opponents are throwing some of their best stuff because they want to test the almighty Chiefs and try to find out where they stand as a franchise, where they stand as an organization. So, and I don't have those answers, but those are the questions I'm wondering in my head. And when the Chiefs get to the bye week, that's part of the questions they've got to ask themselves when they do their self-scouting.
Yeah, and that certainly stands out in a game like this when you're talking about a Chargers team that has a completely new coaching staff, has had a lot of turnover from a year ago. You're going to get different looks. You're going to get different approaches. And there's certainly something to the argument that once again, the Chiefs know that they've got a bullseye on their back. They're going to get everybody's best effort every single week.
All right, every single week. That's what I don't think people get. There is no letdown. There has been no letdown for 3 years.
No, and that's one worrisome thing, I think, for me. It's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you could say, hey, the Chiefs offense has not been playing well. It hasn't been playing up to its own standards, and that's probably the best way to put it, because once again, Mahomes is not the worst quarterback in the league. Look at some of his numbers, and I could absolutely argue that he's still been one of the best 10 quarterbacks in the league. That's a good problem to have. The interceptions have been really the most glaring problem, and that's something that's out of character for him. But at the same time, Chiefs are 4-0 despite the fact that their offense has not been playing up to their own standards. And It's like, has the NFL just missed its opportunity to get the Chiefs when they're down, because this offense, at some point you think is going to find its rhythm. Now, last year it didn't find its rhythm until Christmas, Nick. So, maybe they'll need that moment, and maybe this game was it. Who knows? Because I will say this, for as bad as I thought that the offense looked in the first quarter and had its struggles, there were a couple of times in the second half, most notably that throw that Mahomes had to Kelce, that it seemed like he threw about 15 guys in coverage.
Yeah.
That the throw was like, wait a minute, I have not seen that from Mahomes this year. That was the first throw I think I've really seen this year that was like, okay, that's Patrick being Patrick, just slinging it. That, and not, being worried about the consequences, but not at the same time really worrying about the consequences, but throwing it with authority, because his interceptions weren't thrown that way. His interceptions were, to me, they've been steered. They've been, to me, it's been Patrick Mahomes has been trying to play perfect. He's been trying to not make any mistakes whatsoever. And when you do that as a quarterback, that's all you're going to do, or make mistakes, because you just can't do that. And Andy Reid, I think, put it best after the game, saying that how does Mahomes get out of this? Keep slinging it, keep firing. That's the only way. And there were those couple of throws in that fourth quarter, Nick, that made me think: could this have been the breaking point? Could this be the moment that Mahomes needs to get past all of this?
That is a question I feel like we're going to ask ourselves multiple weeks. I don't think this is just a one-off thing. Part of it is this: how does he get back to that guy? And I'm talking mentally. How does he mentally get back to that guy that can just sling it with ease, that has a certain chip on his shoulder and has this certain, just this, because for him for him and a couple guys on that roster, we've talked about it before last year. Everybody's looking around for that person to be, who's the fire starter, who's the one that lights that fire, that turns it into a bonfire. Who is the one that creates that initial spark that gets everybody, ready, ramped up and ready to really execute at the level that they're capable of? And who is that, and how are they going to go about that? And for a couple of weeks, it was, Mahomes getting the ball to Rashee Rice from time to time, but it wasn't the thing that sustained them each and every week. If that, like, there wasn't anything that was truly sustaining drive after drive after drive after drive. So right now, Kelce had to step up at points and had to be that guy. He had to make some of those moves and make some of those catches, and he had to step up and take on those moments. Then Kareem Hunt had to step up and have some runs where he started to sneakily look a little bit like the Kareem of old, not the same explosiveness, but just the same, I'm going to run with fearlessness. And Travis was going to go out there and catch with fearlessness, and he was going to make the play that this team had to make. There was just a certain will and determination that they ended up finding there in that second half that is that driving force. And right now, that's what the Chiefs as a coaching staff have to be able to tap into, is how do you create that quicker? How do you create that sooner? And how do you make that sustainable? That's the biggest question that the Chiefs have for what they want to get this offense to. And I understand people are saying right now, well, they don't have Rashee Rice. Well, guess what? It doesn't matter, because that's what they get paid for. And they have faith in every single one of those guys, because they always say next man up. So the question is, who wants to be the next man up to help that, whether it's a receiver, whether it's a running back, whether it's one of the tight ends, or it's the offensive lineman themselves, giving Mahomes more time to be able to light defenses up. So that's the question that each one of them has to ask themselves coming into this week before they go on Monday Night Football and try to tell the world that the Chiefs are back in a brand new way. So that's what I'm curious to see from a driving force perspective of what this offense can or can't do in the week and weeks ahead.
And
you want to run through a wall yet, Matt?
Well, and that's the thing I was getting ready to say, Nick, is that I just saw more fire from you than I have seen from this offense through 4 weeks. And that's a problem. And then at the same time, I get it, because like we talked about earlier, you're talking about a 17-game season, 3 or 4 playoff games. You can't. And Andy Reid knows this. Patrick Mahomes knows this. They know that they can't play with the same fire as their opponent every single week.
Right.
Because if they try to do that, they're going to be burned out by the end of October, and they're going to be toast. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it's a fine line. I mean, and I feel like and sound probably a little bit like a hypocrite talking about this when it's saying, hey, play more with fire, play with more energy, play with more focus, all of this. But then at the same time, realize that it's a marathon, not a sprint. But, what I think has only been frustrating about these first 4 games, to your point, is that Patrick Mahomes hasn't looked like Patrick Mahomes. And it's the swagger. Watching Mahomes play with swagger, and I think we saw that in the fourth quarter. I just don't think we've seen enough of it through the first 4 games. But we did start to see, I think, on Sunday, Travis Kelce playing with more swagger.
Well, he was forced to. He knew he had to answer the call. He saw the bat signal go up there, and he saw the Kelce signal arrive after Rice went down, and he was like, well, got to get to work. And then he went out there, and then he tapped into what he had to find that extra that football team needed to will themselves through to that victory. Because here's what I want to say about the Chiefs. What you saw between the Chiefs and the Chargers was simply this. You saw a football team that had a certain level of mental toughness that could sustain through 4 quarters. They didn't get down on themselves. They didn't get frustrated. They just kept, as Eric used to say, chopping wood. And the Chiefs just kept chipping away and chipping away and chipping away and chipping away. They didn't get down because they had this turnover. They didn't get down because this happened or that happened. But then once that throw to Worthy for the 54-yard touchdown happened, then I was like, uh-oh, there you go. Even Smokey the Bear ain't going to be able to stop this fire. So then they got to where they needed to go, and then they blended in some Kareem Hunt and some P. Ryan, and they were able to kind of to find a new way to evolve in this game to be able to do what they had to will themselves to win. And that's the difference between the Chiefs and their opponents through 4 games. Collectively as a team is they all understand the marathon of a single game, let alone an entire season. But they know those high pressure situations. They know the will it takes, and they know how long they have to sustain. They can't just have a flash here or a flash there. They know, okay, we're just going to keep going, do what we need to, adjust here, adjust there. Let's keep the game close to halftime. Did it. Because I knew whenever I was like, hey, it's 10-7 at half. I was like, they're fine. I was like, they're good. Like, it's not a big deal right now because they just needed to be within striking distance going into half, because I knew the coaching staff would be able to make the adjustments they need to really hold off the Chargers and negate what they did. Part of that's because they didn't have the left tackle, right tackle. They also didn't have Derwin James. And then also Herbert, let's be honest, shouldn't have been out there playing, but the Chargers put him out there anyways. And I can only imagine the additional damage he did to his ankle and what that's going to do to them in the weeks ahead with where he played better than I thought he would. And he showed a serious level of toughness that I have no doubt in my mind that ankle is hurting like crazy tonight, tomorrow, and this entire bye week that he's going to deal with.
You mentioned the name, and so I think it's worth talking about here. And you mentioned this before the podcast as well. Last year, Nick, we talked a lot about, debated about did the Chiefs miss Eric Bieniemy? Did they miss having him be the one to light a fire under some guys? And because he's like Mahomes. I mean, he's talked about being the competitive guy and the button pusher. We saw that with EB.
I'm glad you didn't take that further with what
is it. I knew you were worried about that.
But no, you can see in my eyes. I don't want to have to edit this, Matt.
But do the Chiefs still miss Eric Bieniemy?
I think that's a question we will only find out as the season goes along. And part of that may be is there, and I don't know this because I'm not on the sidelines and I'm not in the meeting rooms, but who is the coach on the offensive side of the coaching staff that can just light a fire under that offense, that can challenge them in a way that motivates them, that can push that button that needs to be pushed? Is it a position coach? Is it a coordinator? What is it on that offense side of the ball? Because I know defensively, Joe Cullen ain't gonna mess around, because I've already seen Joe Cullen on the football field. So it's another question that I think the Chiefs are gonna have to kind of decide during the bye week when they do their self scout, where they feel like they're at, and from each coaching perspective, are they doing enough to where they can push these guys in games to Hunter, are they doing enough to bring out the best in those guys? And they might be doing so, and it may just be where they're at. But again, those are all questions you have to ask yourself if you're serious about a three-peat.
Chiefs obviously win this game, Nick, because of the run game. Even though the run game wasn't a ton of yards, they got some yards when they needed them, and specifically, I think got some energy from the run game. Started out very, very poorly. Carson Steele fumbles first opportunity for him to carry the football. He only got one carry the rest of the game, Nick, and it's hard not to draw a line from that fumble to his work the rest of the game.
Yeah.
But Kareem Hunt, 14 carries, 69 yards. Samaje Perine, 5 carries, 14 yards. Most importantly, the touchdown run. He gets the 1-yard touchdown. And the Chiefs, had been struggling in goal line situations, and that Perine got dragged in there by Trey Smith. Call him Will Smith. By Trey Smith. I mean, that wasn't important, but I mean, even though it was 14 carries, 69 yards, that performance from Kareem Hunt today was attention getting.
No, that's what they needed. That's part of what they needed to be able to will themselves to win. And when Kareem started getting in a rhythm there after probably about that 5th or 6th carry, and you started to see that, and you're like, okay, now he's getting that burst back now. And I'm not saying he's getting back to 2018 Kareem, but I'm saying what he showcased today, other than probably you and I talked about beforehand, other than Damian Williams, they haven't just had that type of, as I'm going to use my buddy Therese Paylor saying, they haven't had that type of juice. They just haven't had that in a while. And that kind of helped spark some things for that offense when he started running with a carelessness to where he didn't care. He was going to use his body to run people over if he had to. He was going to give every ounce of energy he had in that moment. And that helped some other guys make some plays along the way there. So I mean, we'll see what happens in the weeks ahead for Kareem and everything. But if they can figure out a way to continue to harness, because I don't think Kareem's in full peak condition right now, personally. But I think if they did, they wouldn't take him out and put Samaje Perine in to finish off that goal line. And so I part of me thinks that, like, if he can continue to get back into football shape and get back into that condition, since he didn't have a training camp and that other stuff, I'm curious to see where he'll be at. Fingers crossed if he can stay healthy, just like anybody else on that roster, where he could be at a month from now.
Yeah, and I'm more than willing to be in the camp to say, okay, Kareem was hurt last year. He had surgery during the offseason because probably played through that sports hernia a little bit. And Cleveland's offensive situation is a train wreck. I'm amazed that Cleveland did as well as they did last year, because their offense is a train wreck, and their ability to utilize anyone should be questioned. So maybe throw a lot of that out with Kareem. But I will say this: I mean, I saw a different Kareem than the one that was in Kansas City, and that this, I mean, not that he wasn't a hard runner before, but this Kareem looks more like a punishing runner, a between the tackles kind of runner. But he doesn't look like he has the explosion of the Kareem before that could hit the outside, that had that kind of speed and acceleration. I mean, I'm not expecting 75-yard runs out of this Kareem, but I mean, can he be a guy that's going to get you 100 yards on any given day? He might.
I think with each passing week, he can potentially get closer to it. Because coming into the game, I was mentally prepared. I'm like, all right, I think I personally was like, I think he'll have 10 touches. I was thinking in my head, I was like, he may get to 15. If he gets to 20, then I was like, he's tapped into part of who he used to be from a rhythm perspective. So I don't think they're quite there, but in the weeks ahead, it wouldn't stun me if Kareem's not getting 20 to 25 touches. But I think that's still 2 or 3 weeks away. and you're crossing your fingers that there's no injuries that force it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I guess I am fitting into the perfect Missouri show me definition here, Nick. I mean, I'm really impressed with what we saw from day one from Kareem, game one. I did not think he was washed. I just think he's a different running back than he was 6 or 7 years ago. We're just going to find out if he still has some of that explosiveness that he had. And if he doesn't, if he's just a different running back, that's not a problem. I mean, it might be exactly what this team needs. The other reason, I mean, maybe the biggest reason why this team obviously won this game Sunday, Nick, was another strong defensive effort. Didn't look like it was going to be that way after the Chargers opening drive. They kind of went down the field off their script pretty effectively. But my goodness, after that first drive, boy, this defense just absolutely shut this Chargers team down.
Yeah, here's your spoiler alert about Greg Roman as an offensive coordinator. You just need a couple series and then you'll be able to adjust if you've got a good defensive coordinator. So you just need a handful of series and then you can adjust. And that's why Baltimore always seemed to keep teams in games and always seemed to have a certain level of struggle. And, you know, and they had the playoff losses that they did. And Greg Roman was an offensive coordinator for a part of those. So he can bring you a run game attitude, but there's also certain pieces of that puzzle he needs to make that thing work. And they were without two of their starting tackles to really be able to tap into it in a way. And the Chiefs now, here's the biggest kicker overall. You only get one chance to surprise the Chiefs if you're an AFC West opponent. Chargers' chance was today. So there's a lot of cards on the table right now. And the Chiefs now know what they're up against and what they're going to face early December on Sunday Night Football. And luckily that game's close enough that I think that game's going to stay on Sunday Night Football, and it's not going to be much of a problem as long as the Chargers and Chiefs both can continue a certain level of health. So it'll be interesting, but I think the Chargers and I think Harbaugh's mannerisms on the sidelines kind of told me he really thought he had him early on. And then the sloppiness that came there in the third quarter and the penalties and everything, you could see him getting really frustrated because he could tell it was slipping away. And he's like, man, we're not there yet. Darn it.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, that was exactly how the game played out from a defensive standpoint. Once the Chiefs kind of got a bead on what the Chargers were doing, after that, it was pretty easy. I mean, Herbert in the first quarter was 7 of 7, 69 yards. The rest of the game, 9 of 20 for 110 yards. And there were times that the Chargers, I mean, clearly were frustrated. I mean, not only were the penalties stacking up, there were moments when I clearly they were not all on the same page, didn't know what plays were being run. They weren't on the same page there. Herbert just about got killed on one play, where it was pretty obvious that they were not on the same page, and he just had to take a knee in the backfield before he got hit. I mean, the Chiefs did what they should have done against a depleted offense that was struggling as much as the Chargers did. But who stood out to you? Because, I mean, to me, Chris Jones stood out today. I mean, he had a Chris Jones kind of day.
Chris Jones has stood out all year. Ever since he got paid, like, he's continued to show why he's one of the best in the NFL and why he is one of the top defensive tackles in that game. He's a game wrecker. And, I mean, he continued to do that. So, like, I have no complaints about what Chris has done out there and how much of a leader and also kind of the tempo setter that Chris has had to be through these first 4 games to really kind of lock in at various moments and really kind of take over and take control of that game, even when he's taking on double teams some of those times. And then when he snuck out there and got to go to defensive end and play against a tackle that had no prayer against him, then really kind of helped close out that game and really frustrated Herbert. And then I don't remember when Herbert tossed his helmet against the bench, but I remember him doing it, and that's all that matters. But yeah, I mean, Chris locked in, and like Spagnuolo, like I knew he was going to wait till he had to do it, but he had those blitzes ready to go and locked up in those key moments when he knew he really needed to do that to really set the tempo and really kind of rattle Herbert and kind of get him off kilter and off rhythm. And once you get a couple of those blitzes and a couple of those hits, Herbert was going to do everything he could, but he also was being very mindful of where certain people were at and how he was going to have to try to get rid of the ball before he took some twists and turns with that ankle with how he was planning and getting taken down from time to time.
Yeah, this was probably a great example of, a game plan where you don't have to get sacks to impact the quarterback. And that was certainly, it seemed like, the Chiefs, hey, they would have loved to have gotten more than the 2 sacks that Chris Jones got today. Mm-hmm. But the fact that they were able to just hit Herbert as often as they did and as hard as they did impacted that game, because I don't think there was any doubt. I mean, as the game wore on, for sure. I mean, Herbert they did a good job early, and the game plan that Greg Roman had initially of just trying to make sure that Herbert didn't get hit, getting rid of the ball quickly, a lot of misdirection, that all worked. But once the tricks went away, I mean, you could tell. I mean, to me, Herbert wasn't the same quarterback in the second half that he was in the first quarter because he didn't have that confidence anymore. Yeah,
if you remember what I told you a couple weeks ago about the Chargers, I said with the Chargers, they really don't have anything at receiver that scares you. Yes, Ladd McConkey had a handful of catches and everything, but he's not at a point where he's going to scare you. Quinn Johnson wasn't going to scare you. And then you were really just leaning on Gus Edwards and then J.K. Dobbins to get you through. And then so if you like you and I were talking about on the phone earlier today, I was like, if I'm in Steve Spagnuolo's thing, I run blitz him, and then I bring some blitzes here and there to make him uncomfortable, to rattle him a little bit, and to also kind of make him move around and aggravate that ankle and really think about the pain in his ankle in between some of those plays and make him want to throw the ball away instead of really trying to compete and fight for that down sometimes. And Steve dialed into those things at various points and really derailed what they were trying to do.
And you mentioned J.K. Dobbins came into this team as one of the NFL's leading rushers, averaging over 7 yards a carry. Today, 14 carries, 32 yards. It sounds like a broken record because it seems like every week the Chiefs are giving up like 14 carries and 30 some odd yards to an opposing team running back that has been putting up big numbers.
Right.
4th game in a row where the starting running back for the other team has been absolutely held in check by this defense.
Yeah, and they'll get another one next week with Alvin Kamara. They'll go against him, and we'll see how that ends up working out. And they're actually gonna have 2 really good receivers next week in that Saints game. So it'll be a little bit more amped up of a task, but there's a certain secret to going after that Saints offense, and the Chiefs have the personnel to be able to do it.
Well, we might try to squeeze in a few of those little tips here by the end of the podcast, but we would be remiss if we didn't deal with the biggest story coming out of this game, and that is obviously the injury to Rashee Rice.
Yeah.
We'll find out, hopefully on Monday what the results of the MRI might be. A couple of days before the Chiefs sneak the word out, but obviously right now the suspicion and the fear that the Chiefs have is that this is a torn ACL for Rashee Rice. They're just hoping that there isn't additional damage in that knee. I mean, a torn ACL as it is would end his season. Devastating for Rashee Rice potentially because he's been off to such a hard start this season, but obviously impactful for the Chiefs as well because this is 3rd offensive weapon that they're down with, missing Hollywood Brown. If he returns, it would probably only be for the postseason. Isaiah Pacheco, expected to miss at least probably 6 to 8 weeks, maybe more. How many blows can this offense take, Nick?
I hate to say it this way, but I mean, their other opponents aren't going to care. They're still the Chiefs in their mind, still the 2-time back-to-back defending world champions, and they don't care who you got on the field. They're going to feel like it's a massive win if they beat Kansas City. So, I know the Chiefs use the motto "next man up," but I mean that's the mentality you got to have. You may have to take a different path to win each week than you wanted to before, and it may not have the style points that you potentially want. But at the end of the day, like that's the road you got to go for to get back to that elusive three-peat that they're chasing.
It'll be interesting to see how the Chiefs do take the field next week. I mean, Xavier Worthy and Justin Watson were their other two starters on Sunday against the Chargers. That's to be expected. Can have a new starter next week. I mean, I would expect that it's probably going to be Juju Smith-Schuster, but obviously the Chiefs also have Mecole Hardman and Sky Moore on the roster. The question to be answered is whether they're going to add if they end up putting Rashee on IR, and we're obviously making a lot of assumptions here, so we're kind of jumping ahead of the cart. I mean, maybe the Chiefs get great news and it's not going to be that bad, but assuming the worst, Nick, I mean, Chiefs on the practice squad have Justin Ross, Nico Armigio, Montrell Washington. I mean, short term, is that one of your solutions if you want to have a sixth wide receiver on the active roster for game day next week?
They're going to have to. Just a matter of if you want to try to throw, if you want Mahomes to try to throw some jump passes to Justin Ross and see if that creates a spark, and really kind of use him on the boundary, a handful of plays to kind of be able to see if that can make up the difference on some of those explosive plays that Rice would have had in the past that would have got you some of those chunk yardage, or if they think Remigio is going to be a guy that they can have kind of help move the chains on a consistent basis. But I would assume between one of those two, that's who you're calling up at this point.
Now the Chiefs have the Saints next Monday night before the bye week. So you essentially, I mean, good grief, you've got the one game until October 20th against the 49ers. Trade deadline's not till November 5th. I mean, if you're Brett Veach, you don't have to jump into anything right now. You've got time, correct, to sit back, to evaluate your situation, see what happens against the Saints, and then go from there as whether you want to, whether it's pursue a trade, look at the free agent market. I mean, you don't have to jump into the pool immediately, right, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, the way people are going to look at it is, well, you want them to learn the playbook and be a part of that and integrate into the system and use that bye week to be a week to where they can get up to speed and everything. But at the same time, there's got to be other teams that are wanting to potentially trade away a player or be able to potentially, sell a guy away for a potential draft pick or whatever it may be. So, like you said, you got the Saints coming up, then you have the bye week. Then you're going to play the Niners. You see how healthy they are at that point. And then you play the Raiders on the road on October 27th before Halloween. And then the trade deadline is just a day or two after Monday Night Football when you play the Bucs at Arrowhead. So between all of that, other teams are going to play themselves out of contention potentially. So then you will know who the sellers are on that market if there's a wide receiver you want to go after. Now the question becomes, is there a wide receiver that you'd feel comfortable enough? You're not getting them for the immediate future. If you trade for them, you're trading for them to make a difference for you in December and January. You are going to have to win in October and November for the most part in different paths in different ways with guys who have either been a part of your team during training camp or have familiarity with the offense in whatever way you go about that. So it'll be interesting to see, but I mean, like I think it's easier, in my opinion, for them to try to go find an explosive running back to add to the mix and kind of lean more on the run game than it is to try to find a receiver that you're going to have either package plays for and slowly work them along all the way till January when you're really needing them the most.
Yeah, there's no doubt this is going to be a difficult situation to navigate for the Chiefs, having to be down 3 offensive starters from what you were hoping for at the beginning of the season. I mean, that said, they're 4-0, Nick. So far they have dealt with the struggles well, but it's definitely going to get harder without Rashee Rice. He was definitely playing himself into becoming one of the leading receivers in the NFL and was absolutely, statistically, you could back it up, a true number 1 receiver for this team. So it's not an easy replacement.
And then I'll say this whole situation, this whole circumstance, everything, I think should be a reminder that no position is a strength. The NFL can wipe it out in just a couple weeks' time. So going into the year, you're like, oh, they got Worthy, Rice, Brown. Okay, this offense can be great all year. Pencil everything in for 17 weeks. and within a month, like you named all the injuries, and that's then that makes you have to completely pivot and do everything. So no matter how many guys you add to your roster, you could always add more, and you always have to add more. That's just the way the NFL works, and especially the running back position for the Chiefs. They always seem to have 5 or 6 running backs in a year just to get through the season.
Well, week 5, Chiefs back at home Monday night to host the New Orleans Saints. A couple of weeks ago, that looked like a really tough battle after the Saints put up a couple of 40 numbers against Carolina and Dallas. They've come back down to earth the last couple of weeks, 2-2, Nick. Your quick thought on the Saints?
That's what happens when teams get tape on you. They just need a couple weeks to get tape on you. Then they'll be able to counterpunch however they need to. And the key to this game, in my opinion, among anything else, is watch how the motion happens for I know he's number 22 for the Saints. His name's escaping me right now. Olave is going to be a handful, but they'll figure it out. But no, Shaheed, I think it's Shaheed. I think she's 22. Kamara's a powerful running back, but he's not as explosive as he used to be. Got good leg drive. They're going to have to tackle him pretty well. Olave is going to be tough, but the key to this game comes down to one simple thing. With Derek Carr, Chris Jones, Tershawn Wharton, collapse that pocket in his lap, he folds like a lawn chair. That's the key. So what Eagles did, that's what other opponents do. Do that. You'll have yourself a fun time.
There you go. Chiefs with meeting an old friend and Derek Carr. We'll be here to talk about it all this week. Tuesday night, we'll be here for the live Q&A, and then Monday night, Chiefs next week. 41 is the mic. We'll be back. Everybody have a great week. Thank you for joining us. We will be back in your feeds later. And with that, Nick, I'll leave it to you.
Till next time, I bid you adieu.
You've been listening to 41 is the Mic, presented by KSHB 41, your home of the Chiefs and Chiefs Digest.